Hi everyone. Today let's talk about Trump's comments and the tanking of the semiconductor stocks. Then we'll get into all the charts and see where markets are set to go for tomorrow's session. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and watch the video till the end to help out the channel, and let's get started. So chip stocks gapped down and fell today on some Trump comments from yesterday's RNC. He mentioned that Taiwan should pay the United States for defense and that they should potentially defend themselves. This is a big shift from the Biden administration, which has been quite public in their defending of Taiwan and TSMC, and all of these stocks cratered here today. So you can see ARM, AMD, Marvell, Qualcomm, Broadcom all closing down more than 7%. Absolutely terrible due to this shift in global policy. The assumption at this point is that Trump is going to be elected, so anything that he says is impacting markets right now, long before the election. And then Trump also mentioned that Taiwan took about 100% of the semiconductor business from the United States. I'm not sure how true that is. Intel does make chips, but they are certainly not the leader in markets. NVIDIA and AMD are the leaders for sure, and the manufacturer for them is TSMC, and they did close down 2.4%, but not nearly as much as the overall semi space, which was that 7% for the SMH. And it'll be interesting to see if this policy actually goes into effect and if markets can recover from this, or if it is a long-term consideration as we get closer to a Trump presidency, in my opinion. Moving over to fear and greed, step down to a 54 makes sense. Markets cratered, 63 yesterday, 54 today. So that's a pretty big jump. Let's go ahead and look at the timeline. Yep, straight down. Big sell-off here today. Still extreme greed on momentum, a little bit surprising there, definitely extended. No change to strength or breadth either. Put-call ratio starting to elevate a little bit, and then the VIX. We talked about the VIX being a thing yesterday, and sure enough, it rocketed higher here today. Chart says 14.48, so we got into that range that we talked about in yesterday's video. Safe haven demand fell back into neutral. Junk bond demand still in regular greed, so really very little movement there. Moving over to the earnings calendar, J&J beat on the top and bottom. ASML missed on the top line. United Airlines missed on the top line, beat on the bottom. Discover beat on the top and bottom. Huge beat there on the bottom line. Wonder if there's something going on there. Might have to look that up later. US Bank Corp also beating on the top and bottom. And then tomorrow, don't forget Netflix, After Hours, Abbott Labs, Blackstone, Domino's Pizza, Alaska Airlines. And then to close out the Friday, we do have American Express, fairly decent there, SLB, and that'll wrap it up for the week. Moving over to the economic calendar, CPI for the Eurozone met expectations as usual. They're pretty accurate, or they tweak it right at the end, who knows. And then Atlanta Fed GDP actually came in better than expected. 20-year bond auction a little bit lower than the previous, so that's interesting. And then looking at Thursday, Philly Fed manufacturing, ECB press conference, 10-year tips. But the most interesting thing for me are those initial jobless claims. Want to see if those continue to tick higher or not. And then Friday, remember, there is nothing. Moving over to the charts, this was a dumpster fire today, 1.4% down on the S&P 500. We talked about this structure yesterday, gapped right through that and fell straight down. We're right at the lows here now from Thursday, right at the trend line here. Huge selling volume on the last candle of the day, and that huge selling was 2.16 million on the last hour, which is quite a lot. Haven't seen that since the close on Friday, which was an end of week close, so you expect a little bit more volume there. Big selling on that Thursday before as well, 2.6 million. So big selling, 200 SMA sitting at 555 flat, trend support tomorrow, sitting around 556.44. Momentum stepping to bearish, RSI stepping to bearish. You can see big volume on the day, 56.8 million. Go ahead and extend out this trend line. If we were to hit that one tomorrow, that would be down around 552.84. 21 EMA sitting down there at 551.59. So I think we're probably going to go into that range, and then we'll see what happens from there. Similar to the move that we saw here. Big down candle, 2 up days, and then gap down fall, hit the trend. Very similar setup. Big down day, 3 up days, gap down fall, and then we'll see what happens from there. Moving over to the Tasty charts, you can see that drop off. We were at the upper ATR. We'd been talking about it for a couple of days. We were grinding at that level. Gap through the 8. 21's your next support down there at 551.74, and then ATR support 548.76. So a couple of points of downside potential there, about $7 or $8 probably. Momentum, weirdly bullish here on the gap down. Volume, big selling as you would expect. And then looking at that 4-hour chart, obviously we're in bearish conditions on the 4-hour. We hit it there on the 11 o'clock candle. Hit that 55 EMA at 556.46, probably headed towards that lower band, sitting at 552.96, right at the 89 EMA, right in that zone. So might see a slight pullback, would expect a push to that lower band. Then we'll see what happens from there, if it's going to be grinding price action down to the 144, or if we're going to see a little bit more of a bounce from there. So either way, expecting continuation to the downside after the almost $8 sell-off here today. Moving over to the NASDAQ, even more selling here today, 2.94%, $14.50 of downside. Huge volume. Selling was 56 million shares. Momentum, very bearish on the daily chart. Look at that gap and go. Took out this level, took out the trend, took out the next level, hit this one here. Pretty sure I added this level at 481.94. Otherwise, my next support was going to be 477.69. I think we might find a little bit of a bounce here, maybe in the pre-market, but again, expecting more downside, not looking for anything bullish until at least that 477 level. And then look at this structure here on the daily chart. Let's go full screen on that. You can see we have not been below that 21 EMA on a closing basis since all the way back here in May. And zooming out a little bit, you can see once that structure broke, we had quite a bit of selling. Looks very similar to this candle, which resulted in about a 6% down move. If we do get a move like that, that would be down into the 470, 467 area, $7 from that most recent peak, which would also bring you right into that 55 EMA area at 465.25. So expecting more downside. We'll see how aggressive it gets, with the current support potentially around that 465.25 area, which is that 55 EMA. Moving over to the daily chart on the Tasty charts here, you can see we did get that change of conditions. We took out the ATR stop. That was at 485.84. Broke almost down to that 34 EMA, which is 479.43. Huge volume. Our vol level was 239. So more than 2 times your average volume. Momentum very bearish. Lowest ATR band 468.81. So right in that same range, right around the 470s. That's where I would be looking to start dipping my toe back into the bullish side after this big swing down that we're seeing here. And then looking at the hourly chart, it is worth mentioning we're already at that lowest ATR band. That's at 482.19. I do expect to continue to grind lower. Momentum did see a slight step on that last candle. We'll see how that plays. Maybe you look for a short-term bounce up to that 8 EMA right in the 488 area. That would be your resistance. Hit that and then look for that bigger swing down. ATR trailing stop here is 496.55. Everything says that this is bearish except for that little short-term move here, kind of like we saw here where you get a little bit of an upswing and then another continuation lower. Either way though, huge volume. R-vol on both of those, 238 and then 283. Big selling throughout the day on the 4-hour chart. Just getting a little extended in the short term. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow, very different story here. You can see the Dow was up 0.5%, took out this trend line here, gapped down actually, and then rallied up, continuing higher after hours. So now you're looking for that trend up around 417, big move. Volume, momentum, everything still looks bullish here. And then the Russell tried to go higher, hit the price target, 226.06. That was our price target yesterday. Touched that level, rejected down. It's up a little bit after hours, about 75 cents. So to me, still looks bullish. Could be an initial test. Still very extended, but that's to be expected with these huge moves. And even if these were to get a bit of a rejection, I would expect a much higher low and then a continuation higher. So I don't foresee this trend changing in the medium term, but short term, you could look for a little bit of a pullback. Moving over to stocks that moved today, we got AMD and ASML, the tech stocks that we've been talking about, getting absolutely obliterated today, minus 10.2%. and 12.7% respectively. You could argue that AMD was at a major resistance here. You could see I had the level 184.29. Pretty sure we talked about this one. Had the upswing to resistance, down move. You could argue this looked like it was going to move much lower into the day already, but huge volume, 76.6 million, huge gap down, huge fall, took out multiple levels. And you can see this does look like a bear flag setup. Big move down, consolidation, looking to break this structure here. And then if that 200 breaks, it looks like AMD is going to be set for some much lower lows over the medium term. See how it plays. 200 is 152. And extending out that trend line here, you can see that's sitting down around the 140 area. So we'll see how that plays. AMD looking quite bearish. And then similarly here on ASML, this is not a chart that I look at very often, so I had to add some levels to try to give it some structure. You can see a high, higher high. We have a low here. We'll see if this can form a higher low. 144 EMA at 926, 200 sitting all the way down at 847. Again, huge volume, 5.18 million. The average volume here is closer to 1.2, 1.3 million. So many times the volume, our vol would be closer to that 3 or 4 number. And you would expect continuation, usually around half of what we saw on that first day move. So we got 12 today, would expect another 5 to 6% tomorrow. Moving over to the Mag 7, they were not exempt either. 3.31% down here. 265.08 was the level. The low of day was 265.06. So we did touch that level almost to the penny. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish. Trend support sitting down here around 260. That'd be another 2% down or so, which actually fits with the thesis. Then we'll see what happens. You could get a bounce into a lower high, and then we'll see what happens from there. You would expect lower lows, maybe down to the highly traded zone, closer to that 239, but I think we've seen them peak here. Now we're waiting to see if we get maybe a double top, lower high setup, and then we'll see what happens. But markets seem to be shifting, big move down, and you expect continuation over the short or maybe the medium term. Moving over to Apple and Microsoft, these also participated in the down move, 2.53 and 1.3%. Apple gapped down to the trend line, overthrew it pretty substantially, and then held the level, momentum bearish, RSI bearish. Not huge volume for Apple, only 57.2 million. That's average. You can see here a big volume days closer to that 250 million. You can see these 3 bear candles, and then that was a peak volume day, which ended up being a reversal. See how it happens here. 21 EMA sitting at 220.66, and then trend support if that current trend breaks down around 217.50. So we'll see how that plays. And then looking at Microsoft, gap through the trend here. So this structure is pretty broken here now. We've been below this before. Let's go ahead and add a trend, see if we can find some structure right around there. So if we were to touch that level, that would be close to that 433.48 area, right at that 55 EMA in that same zone, which is 432.68. So momentum bearish, RSI bearish, expecting more continuation down to those lows. Then we'll see what happens. It is catching a little bit of a bounce after hours. Seems like all of these tech names are catching a small bounce. I would expect that to be short-lived and that more continuation is coming, but it is worth mentioning. Moving over to Tesla, we talked about this being a lower high setup, and that is what's happening so far. 3.14%, momentum bearish, RSI bearish. Support is 232.57. We'll see if we can find support there and then see what happens. I would expect a higher low off of this move, but it was such an aggressive move. A higher low could be anywhere around that 200, down around 205.50, which is still substantially lower from here. So certainly possible you see a pretty decent pullback before we get that bigger push up. And then looking at NVIDIA, it finally cracked here. So we were expecting the lower high, which is what we got. So we got the high, hit that level, established that all-time high, rallied back up to the trend line, rejected from there on the big volume day. And since then, it's been feeble. Broke the 21 yesterday, gapped through the level here today. 55 could be support around 112.50. But really, we've been talking about this 111 area right in this zone here. And then trend supports all the way down at 107. And I would expect this to continue lower. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish, big volume on the day here as well. 3.87 million shares on NVIDIA. The last couple days have been around 200 million. So almost double that volume. And it does seem like it's going to be going lower tomorrow. Moving over to Meta and Amazon. Meta down 5.68%. This has been abysmal since its most recent high. Down around 14.5%. And it just seems like it's going to continue. Support would be 454. Certainly could hold that level maybe. All the EMAs are broken on a closing basis. 200 sitting down there at 423.84. Momentum hugely bearish. Pretty decent volume there. About double the 2 previous days. RSI down in the 33s. I would expect that to at least get to oversold conditions. So we'll see how that plays. And then looking at Amazon, big gap down here, 2.64%. Hit that 9 EMA on the gap up, tried to rally, sold off, held the 21, gap through it. Now we broke the 188.64 level. We're holding the trend line here, almost to the penny on a closing basis. Touch the 55 EMA, touch the highly traded zone. So there is potential for support in here. Could be interesting. Maybe you see that rally, lower high setup and then a fall, or we could cut right through it. 181.41 is the level. You can see this previous low at that 174 area, and then that 144 EMA down at 175.95. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish. Not a ton of volume, but everything structurally is starting to shift. Moving over to staples and discretionaries, clearly a big difference between the two here today. Staples up 1.29%, so it did exactly what we thought it was going to, gapped and rallied. 79.90 is the price target, trend line just above that, around $80. Huge volume on the day, 18.2 million. Previous day's volume was 7.9, so double that volume, big move, closed around the highs, probably headed towards that 79 area, at least another dollar of upside there. And then discretionaries, 1.67 to the downside, rejecting off that 198 level. Didn't quite touch the trends. We talked about this as being a zone of resistance. It is breaking down from there currently. Momentum bearish, RSI breaking down through that SMA. Still holding the EMA there at 190.90. I would expect that to break, and then we'll see what happens. If we get all the way down to that 21, that would be 186.37. But structurally, we're definitely starting to see some cracks. Moving over to financials and oil and gas. Financials does not care at all, up another 0.76%. That brings this most recent rally here up to almost 9%. Big move on financials, continues to go straight up. Volume ramping, momentum bullish, crazy move there. And then oil and gas did gap higher, did rally. High of day was all the way up at 151.47. Gave all of that back and finished slightly bearish. I don't think this is going to shift the structure. I think we're probably going to hold this higher low and then keep pushing up to 154. Probably a better entry here after the push up, retest, and then hold. Honestly, I would have wanted a deeper pullback, so I might be watching for that closer to that 146, 147 area in here. But either way, oil and gas looks like a better place to be than tech right now. Moving over to oil and gold. Oil on the day was positive, about 2.5%, and then it gapped down really aggressively back towards that 81.50 area. Gave a lot of the gains back there. Still above that 80.97 level, which is good. Momentum still bearish, RSI still a little bit bearish, so looks like we might be getting a bull flag setup, and then we'll see what happens from there, back up to that 96 area. And then gold was slightly negative on the day. I still like this move. Momentum and RSI still bullish in my opinion. Just getting a short-term pullback, might be retesting that 225 level, and then we'll see what happens from there. Moving over to RIOT and Marathon, these got an inside candle, so that might be signaling these are done, at least for the short term. Got very close to that trend line. Let's go ahead and extend that out a little bit. You can see we just couldn't quite touch it. High of day was 27.30, trend line sitting there at 27.60, so within a couple of pennies of the level, but we got a little bit of a breakdown on RSI. We were obviously super overbought with those two up candles, so see how it plays. Probably going to see a pullback, find a higher low, and then get another push to that trend, similar to what we had here. Pushed up, pulled back, held the level, pushed up again. I would expect a higher low setup on this most recent rally, but we'll see how it plays. Inside candle, I would be cautious for a little bit more pullback. Moving over to 20 and 50-day breadth. Honestly, breadth did not move that much. 50-day breadth did touch the level, 77.46. High of day was 78.13, so overthrew it, sold off. Momentum, still bullish here on the 50, still overbought. But the interesting thing here is 20-day breadth. So we got a bear candle, about 5% down, nothing crazy. But look at that step on momentum. Usually once you get that first step, there's going to be more to follow. At least one more day, even if you're on an upswing, you get a second bear candle. If this is a true rollover, it's going to look something more like this, where you get a pretty gradual step down. Could be a dramatic one down to these lower ranges. Definitely extended to the upside, so could be looking for a bigger pullback. And like I said, this looks like an initial start here on the 20-day breadth. Moving over to the dollar, this continues to crater like we expected it to. We talked about it yesterday breaking down. We had a slight floor, had a slight retest, got the breakdown. Low of day was 103.65, just about a penny off of my level there at 103.64. So momentum bearish, RSI bearish, still expecting that to go lower. And you can see it here, maybe finding a little bit of structure in that support area. But once this broke here on that 2 o'clock candle, it was straight down from there. So we'll see how it plays. Dollar continues to look very weak going into tomorrow's session. Moving over to yields. Yields actually caught a little bit of a bounce. 2-year was up about 0.5%. Still hanging out in that same range though, nothing crazy. Still expect this to go lower, probably just a little extended. You can see that RSI reading on Tuesday was 23.27, so super low on the RSI read. Might be finding a little bit of support in this 4.39 area. You can see that was important back here. And then looking at the 10-year, 0.02, basically flat. More interestingly, really on both of these here, you can see momentum momentum, swinging to bullish just a little bit. RSI still bearish, but momentum could be looking for a little bit of a pullback. Let's extend this out. Maybe we come back, test this level around 4.25, then we'll see what happens from there, if we get another breakdown or not. Moving over to bonds, as soon as we touch that 95.61 level, we did gap down, tried to gain it all back, couldn't quite do it. Momentum still bullish, RSI fading a little bit. Could be looking for that higher low setup. TLT on the other hand, basically unchanged, 0.02. Momentum bullish, RSI still bullish, still within this structure here. If it holds, could look for a push up. If this breaks, probably looking for a 92 area. Go ahead and extend out that trend line. That would give you some support around that 92.50 area. Moving over to volatility, move index, not doing much, selling off a little bit. VIX on the other hand, big jump, 9.62%. Momentum bullish, RSI bullish, not overbought. Got a new higher high from this previous high here. Looking to overthrow this one in my opinion. Touch that 14.7 level. I do think we're probably going higher here. Let's see if we can find some areas. Maybe here around 16.5. That was the peak back from April. You can see that overall move from March into April peaked up around that 21 area. I don't know necessarily if we're going to go that high, but I would expect a push at least into the 16s. Then we'll see what happens from there. So expecting at least one more up day on volatility, meaning markets are likely to fall tomorrow in my opinion. Moving over to my accounts, of course, I lost a bunch of money. When you get big gap downs like that, it's pretty hard to adjust your positions to where you're not losing money, but I was able to avoid most of it, surprisingly. $14 down and I lost $14, so it's as if I only held 100 shares, even though I was holding 200 shares going into the day. Fortunately, still losing about half of the move down is not great. I try to lose less than that on big down days. Not terrible, but not great. And then IWM didn't make any adjustments there at all. My call here is 222, so still sitting on that same position. And that did bounce a little bit after hours up to 223, so still no issues there. We'll continue to sit on that and see what happens. And then in terms of positions for the Qs, I sold calls all day. So sold some 489s, held those to expiration, sold some 486s for tomorrow, and then some 494s for a little bit further out. All calls, all bearish here on the Qs, expecting more down move, looking to establish at those levels that I mentioned. Doesn't mean I can't play a short-term upswing if we do start to see some bullishness, and I will make adjustments if it does happen. But over the medium term, still expecting more downside. But over the coming days, still expecting more downside, even if we see a move into a lower high and then that bigger breakdown. So either way, bearish on the Qs, still neutral on the IWM. Let me know what you think of Trump's comments about the semiconductor space and Taiwan. Do you think he'll actually follow through on that, especially with the market reaction that we saw today? Or is this just a talking point and he's not actually going to do it? That's probably not true. He does tend to follow through on things that he says, especially of this magnitude, but certainly possible. Otherwise, like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.